Hello. I'm going to talk about Jane Addams really quickly now, and this is the first mini lecture on a theorist, and of course, this is one of the authors. So far, people have been leaving excellent comments on Perusall for the Addams reading. So we're reading Democracy and Social Ethics, which is one of Jane Addams' most famous works, but I can just list some of the titles of the other things she's written. The settlement as a factor in the labor movement. So the settlements, like I'll get into that in a second, but it's like the whole house that is sort of like a place where people in need will go, and she helped create one of these settlements. The Spirit of Youth in the City Streets, 20 Years at Hull House, Democracy and Social Ethics, that's what we're reading. Newer Ideals of Peace, A Modern Lear, Long Road of Women's Memory, Peace and Bread in Times of War. I'm actually reading that book right now to help supplement what we're learning about in this class. So I might make a separate presentation on peace and bread in times of war. So yes, I have this textbook, which is a classical Soc textbook that in other versions of Soc 168 gets assigned, and you just have to slog through this 500-page book. But I'm just going to hop around in these mini lectures talking about some of the findings from this. And then, of course, I have some of my own notes, but I'm going to share some slides to make it a bit more digestible. And my aim is for this to be less than 7 minutes. So if I'm rushing through it, please forgive me. I'll post these slides as well. So Jane Addams was born in Illinois, and she in Cedarville, Illinois on September 6, 1860. And her family was involved in business and politics. She attended good schools, excelled academically, graduating as a valedictorian of Rockford Seminary in 1881, and dealt with some illness in her young adulthood, but during that time she was still writing and theorizing. She was lucky enough to travel to Europe, and she saw in London when she was traveling there these settlements, which were places where educated people, often women, would create places for those in need. So people would get basically an apartment or a room to stay in, whether it's a small family or an individual who's impoverished and doesn't have a place to stay. And it was a semi-permanent place to stay. So it's kind of this idea of having settlements excited Jane Addams so much that together with Ellen Gates Starr, they rented this building in Chicago that that was called the Whole House, that they named, and it was in an impoverished working class part of Chicago, and the Whole House became this place where people could come to stay, and it was a lot of highly educated women living there to kind of practice their social ethics, as well as many people actually in need, co-living together in this big building with many rooms. So this was where she lived much of her life and conducted lots of work. A short list of some of the other sociological theorists and many other feminist theorists, women sociologists in the early 1900s and late 1800s, people like Charlotte Perkins Gilman, who we'll learn about later. Marianne Weber visited the Whole House. These are all people who visited or stayed in the Whole House. So Charlotte Perkins Gilman was a resident for a year. Marianne Weber, who's Max Weber's wife, visited. Beatrice Potter Webb stayed. Ida B. Wells stayed. And also Anna Julia Cooper. So see, these are some of the most prominent women classical theorists, all stayed at the Whole House at various times. Got to meet Jane Addams and to, of course, talk about their theories together and influence each other's work a little bit. And later on in life, Jane Addams was a Nobel Peace Prize winner for her work, but also on the FBI's most dangerous radicals list at the very, very beginning of the Red Scare. This is even before World War II, of course, because she died before that. So let's talk about her sociological theory a little bit. First off, like I just listed a bunch of other feminist sociological theorists. Jane Addams really did center gender dynamics. So thinking about women's work in a family and how it's not really rewarded in the capitalist economy. She wasn't a materialist like Marx, looking at material conditions, but she thought that ideas and material conditions were just interwebbed, working together to create the social and concrete reality we live in. She was very pacifist, so this meant being anti-war, even during times that there's a lot of patriotic sentiment that was popularized, people supporting their brothers and sons going to fight in Europe during World War I. Jane Addams was strategizing ways of limiting the damage, how to bring soldiers back sooner and end the war sooner and settle conflicts without violence. So social ethics are at the core of her theory, and she defined this this is a short, simple definition, although it sounds kind of complicated already, the short, simple version, but in the textbook it says it's a social ethic is the practice of rules of right relationship that produce and sustain in the individual an orientation to action based on concern for the welfare of a community or identification with the common lot. So a social ethic is caring about other people, their perspectives, their wants, needs, and desires that may be different from one's own. And we'll see later on so we're reading The Individualized Society by Bauman as well. He doesn't talk explicitly much at all about social ethics in Jane Addams' terms, but you can see how as theories they fit together a little bit. They're both critical of individuality or individualism, people kind of pursuing their own selfish interests and limiting their moral obligation to look out for the good or needs of others. So social ethics is really at the core of her theory of creating an awareness that really is not just your own needs, but the needs of a community and the needs of others in that community. So to do this, she valued diverse, real experiences of real people more than abstract ideas. So there's this trend where early sociological theorists, particularly men who were not very concerned with feminist issues, also coincidentally, or maybe not, they didn't always stick to the real world or give concrete examples in their theories. Sometimes it's just these heady, floaty ideas and abstraction, where it's like, okay, maybe that works in a fictional story, but there's not enough grounding those theories with people's lived reality, especially when you're theorizing about social dynamics. Different individuals operating in real social dynamics might not map onto the abstractions that a lot of the male theorists would talk about and write about. So Jane Addams really highlighted this kind of, she called it bifurcated consciousness, the awareness of a division between formal textual descriptions of life and one's own lived experience. And that's a quote from a review of Addams by Dorothy Smith in 1987. Jane Addams concurrently, or not concurrently, in that spirit, she valued interdependence of people in society. So not just individuals being interdependent, but families too. So if a woman is just looking out for her children's well-being and kind of not concerned at all about other kids and other families, then that's not going to benefit the well-being of her own family too. She noticed this across different classes in her own upper middle class upbringing, as well as in the lives of many, many people who are working class or even really poor that she met while working and living in the Whole House. So Jane Addams really did practice what she preached in terms of getting to know the experiences in an intimate way of people of all various sorts of privilege, different races, ethnicities, religions, and of course, different genders. She was feminist. So her sociology kind of has this activist spirit, and we'll get to that in a second when we talk more about the actual methods of how she is a sociologist and does research. And the last little note, she's a collectivist, so she's very critical of individualism. I guess I already noted that. to to be an activist and a sociologist requires doing things. So people label Addams as a pragmatist. This means that she was living in Hull House. She was cleaning the bathrooms. She was having small talk with people, drinking tea. I wasn't there, it was 100 years ago, but my assumption is that kind of the theorizing and the sociological work that Jane Addams was doing was indistinguishable, inseparable from just the day-to-day living, the taking care of chores that would maintain the Hull House for decades. So this way of doing sociology is kind of like trial and error. It's a scientific method of, maybe this will work, whether it's a social arrangement or a material thing, and then trying it and seeing it and then adjusting. So this could be, as you know, you see, we're reading in our reading on perusal, there's a lot of comparing and contrasting of charity visitors. So people who are well off visiting the Hull House or another place where there's impoverished people and maybe trying to help them to save their own conscience. But she contrasts that with people doing a bit more of like peer-to-peer helping, people who understand what it's like to be in need and can help others like that. So her sociology consists of a lot of case studies and social experiments. So some of the other Chicago school feminists, this is a group of women sociologists that Jane Addams was one of them. They would do these kinds of social experiments. One woman wrote about working at a department store during a busy holiday season and seeing how both children and women were working under harsh conditions and wrote about that. So that kind of echoes many of the contemporary studies in sociology nowadays that use participant observations as a research method. So when you value the concrete and particular specific lived experiences, you're less concerned with a big data representational blanket that covers up everything, trying to make sense of an entire society. And instead, you're really focusing on some few individuals and using them as case studies to make sense of the world. And like, okay, you can really see in depth what this person was thinking and feeling while experiencing different dynamics of privilege or oppression, and what types of solutions could be made in those dynamics, and theorizing and problem solving. It's pragmatic. So in the Hull House, one of those ways of practicing what she preached was living as a good neighbor and studying the social dynamics through neighborly relations. And neighborly relations is a key term from Jane Addams. It refers to understanding one's the other person's needs and desires, even if you're different from them, even if you disagree, you can coexist and tolerate those differences and find common solutions. So this is really how democracy works in her view. It's not converting others to join your cause. It's meeting people where they're at. And another term that has to do with all of this is vantage points. So it's other people's personal experiences. And she valued not just one vantage point or another, but gathering really diverse sets of vantage points across racial lines, religions, ethnicities, genders, etc. I think I've been talking for too long. I'm sorry. I'm really excited about Jane Addams, obviously, because she's the first reading we're reading, and she's a hardcore anti-individualist. So she's a collectivist, a good neighbor. She often highlights the failures of elites at understanding the poor. So you'll see that a lot in Democracy and Social Ethics as we read that. And I guess I'll end with this note that she says that democracy cannot be built by people expecting others to change according to their wishes. Democracy involves sublimating one's own wishes in favor of listening to and working together with others across differences. And actually, I paraphrased what she wrote in that. That wasn't a quote, it's not in quotes. So yeah, that's the last slide of this. The interdependence of people I touched on, that's another key thing. Something to keep an eye out for. She's critical of people making generalizations, but she still does make generalizations in order to make things digestible in her writing. So when she talks about the charity visitor, it's not like she names them like, oh yeah, that's Chris and Janet who visited the charity. No, it's people kind of in an abstract sense that are, in a sense, being turned into a category, but it's that's the work that sociologists do, people like Jane Addams, and then the people who are also not as feminist. She's very critical of individual morality because she sees that in order for someone's morals and ethics to make a social impact, they have to be informed by social dynamics and other people's vantage points. So she really argues for social ethics and morality, not individual. And that'll be a cool contrast to see about how Zygmunt Bauman observes the world we live in the individualized society of consumers. I'll leave it at that. I might make more Jane Addams videos, but this is a start, and I'm really grateful for you for tuning in, listening to this mini lecture. If we were in person, we would have some discussion or some kind of activity, but our activity right now is getting the readings still, making sure you gain access to the readings and take a look yourself, comment, ask questions, respond to your peers. Stephanie and I are really proud of people who've gotten started with that. People's autobiographical posters are looking really good too. So make sure, even if it's a day late, you'll just lose a little bit of points, but otherwise you're still going to be fine. Keep on asking questions. We're here, even though it's asynchronous and online. It's been a really good first week so far, and stay tuned. Maybe tomorrow, maybe Saturday for a Zygmunt Bauman video. I guess it's worth noting, if you prefer working Monday through Friday, that's fine. If you work an actual job Monday through Friday and you're working on the weekend, that's fine. You can do your work anytime in this class. I'm trying to make the deadlines as early as they possibly can be for each assignment so that it gives Stephanie and I more time to grade, and also it keeps people on pace so that a lot of the work gets done early on in this class. You will notice, though, that I made the concept map assignment due on the 18th rather than the 11th, just so that I can do more of these mini lectures and give people a bit more of a foundation in some of these classical theorists and their perspectives. Wow, this has probably been like a 2-hour mini lecture instead of a 7-minute one. Stop sharing. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.